Hello.
Our story begins inside the Tower of the Invisible Hand. Anakin was eager to save Obi Wan after defeating Dooku and freeing Palpatine. As he and Palpatine made their way for the exit, the Chancellor told Anakin to leave Obi Wan behind, but they would never make it. Anakin feared the same idea, but this was his master. Palpatine then became pretty adamant that they leave the tower now. He didn't want to die, and he showed off this persona that he wanted Anakin to be loyal to. Anakin looked down at Obi Wan, still not even getting a chance to feel his pulse or anything like that yet. He was not cold, but truthfully, the hit he took could have killed him. It was hard though. Anakin told Palpatine that he couldn't leave his master behind. The Chancellor very quickly informed him that only the strongest survived. If he slowed them down for Kenobi, then they would all be killed. He had his chance. He likely wouldn't survive anyway. The hit he took probably killed him. Anakin didn't want to agree or even listen to his friend at this point. He had a rebuttal on the tip of his tongue, but he couldn't muster the strength to stand up to Palpatine. He already executed Dooku like it was nothing. Could he just leave Obi-Wan behind like he was nothing? Anakin questioned himself, and the thought of saying to Palpatine that Obi-Wan's fate would be the same as theirs left his mind. He instead felt the ship rock back and forth under a volley from a Republic ship at the line. Reinforcements had arrived. The Battle of Coruscant would be over soon, and Palpatine again was right. If they didn't get off the ship now, they'd be trapped, and despite Skywalker's talent, he couldn't take on the entire ship alone and keep Palpatine alive. So, they left. Anakin got up and ran over to Palpatine as the Chancellor started for the door. Skywalker turned back, feeling the ship buckle under the pressure of the heavy fire. He frowned, looking at the seemingly lifeless body of Obi-Wan Kenobi. There was a lot of confusion coursing through Anakin at the moment. While he was entirely responsible for deciding to leave Obi-Wan behind, there was clearly something else going on inside of that mind of his. He did want Dooku to be brought to justice, but the way it was done felt wrong, even to him. It wasn't the Jedi way. The entire action of being the executioner felt terrible. Dooku's terrified expression as Skywalker dragged the lightsabers towards each other was plastered across his head. He hated the look and tried to force it from his mind. These delusioned thoughts were pressing his genuine emotions regarding Obi-Wan to the back of his head. He just knew he needed to trust Palpatine, and because he was an elder and a mentor, perhaps he knew best in this situation. Though the further the two of them got away from the tower, Anakin realized that perhaps he made the worst mistake of his entire life. He couldn't even fathom what would happen if Obi-Wan was actually alive. Truthfully, despite not getting a feel for his pulse, Anakin wasn't entirely sure if Kenobi died on impact or not. He was pinned under a catwalk and definitely knocked out from the blow, but aside from that, he was unsure. Anakin and Palpatine continued through the ship, avoiding elevators, battle droids, and eventually getting caught inside of some ray shields. Due to their capture, they were brought to the Bridge of the Invisible Hand. Grievous was still unaware that Dooku had died. He was realistically more focused on the battle at hand. If they could beat back the Republic, the war could be won today. However, it was becoming clear, especially after another volley, that their fight on Coruscant was coming to an end. They had done so well up until this point, but Republic reinforcements were entering the fray. Some experimental Star Destroyers were also approaching the conflict. Palpatine's military-industrial complex had been producing larger ships of the line called Star Destroyers. Unlike the Venator, the Republic Star Destroyer was a ship of the line, one meant to trade blows with its enemy and obliterate them through sheer force. Grievous was informed of these super ships, and so he naturally prepared for a retreat from Coruscant. But first, he would deal with his prisoners. The Chancellor and Anakin Skywalker were here, at long last. The two most successful generals of the Clone Wars had finally come in contact. The little exchange on Naboo didn't count. So, instead, they finally had a chance to really talk to each other. Anakin was short for words, and as the potential death of Obi-Wan began to set in, he felt rage grow within. Instead of directing it at the two people responsible, Palpatine and himself, he took it out on Grievous with the help of R2. Anakin had to abandon the Chancellor so he could pin Grievous into the bridge, but it didn't matter. A short engagement would begin, where General Grievous would seize control over the fight and kick Anakin over a control panel and into the floor. The droid general blasted the window open and escaped. He knew he would probably get the kill on Skywalker, but the Republic would destroy the ship before Anakin or the Chancellor could get out of the battle anyways. So he trusted fate to finish his dirty work. Grievous at this point had no reason to assume that that would do him wrong. With another volley opening up on the Invisible Hand, it was only a matter of time until the ship imploded or slammed down onto the surface of the planet. Depending on how the ship landed, it could be lethal for everyone on board. Grievous assuming it would be. Anakin, Palpatine, and R2 worked diligently to make sure they survived the entire ordeal. It was a surprise to Palpatine that Anakin would become so direct towards him, but they needed every able body to be prepared for such an intense landing. They worked in unison with each other to make sure they landed on the surface with half a ship. They did accidentally take out an air traffic control tower, but who cares about those people anyways? Anakin started to dissociate himself from everything. He didn't really know how to process leaving his master behind on the invisible hand. Now he felt that he was entirely responsible for Obi Wan's death. With half the ship splitting off and falling into the surface, surely Kenobi would be dead, even if he did survive the impact. Anakin dropped Palpatine off at the executive building, and then instead of carrying on, he left. He couldn't be around anyone. He and Padme made an arrangement to meet up near the front of the building, near the landing docks, which in hindsight didn't make a ton of sense considering the nature of their secret relationship, but as much as Anakin wanted to see her, he couldn't be around anyone, and he most certainly couldn't be playing that little game with Padme. Skywalker, instead of going to the temple, went to Padme's apartment. He could have gone to the council to inform them of Obi Wan, but again, he was very dissociated at the moment. He hadn't had time to process anything, executing Dooku and leaving Obi Wan behind being the biggest things on his mind. The reason the execution of Dooku stayed on his mind was the fact that it was a direct correlation with Obi Wan's apparent death. Anakin tried to look for a reason within himself for why he would dare listen to an inexperienced man who told him to make 2 military decisions on time. As a Jedi, Anakin should have saved both Dooku and Obi Wan. The reality being that even though Dooku had become an atrocious man since his fall from the Order, he was still a sentient being. He should have stood trial and lived the rest of his life paying for his crimes against the galaxy. But things didn't play out that way because of Palpatine. Anakin really struggled with losing Obi Wan though. Of course he did. While Ahsoka was off on Mandalore fighting Maul, Obi Wan was meant to be here on Coruscant with him. Anakin simply couldn't get the thought off of his mind. He pictured Obi Wan being awoken by the sound of the ship tearing apart. In a moment of crisis and chaos, he would get up and search for Anakin, trying to make sure he was alright. After all of that, he would find Dooku's decapitated corpse and realize that Anakin won, and at that conclusion, Obi-Wan would realize that Anakin abandoned him. Skywalker thought of Kenobi's last moments being filled with betrayal, shame, and disappointment, as the ship was ripped into pieces and he likely thrown out into the chasm of space, dead just as the glass shattered, ice consuming his flesh and his heart running cold. Anakin was an emotional wreck. The Jedi were looking for information regarding Obi-Wan, but it seemed as if all the information they needed came from Palpatine, the man who informed Mace Windu that Dooku was killed inside the Invisible Hand, and Obi-Wan had died during the conflict. It was a shame to hear, but it led Windu to wonder where Anakin was. Everyone saw Palpatine and Skywalker together on the vessel when they arrived. Everyone welcomed Palpatine back, and then Anakin just vanished. It was definitely very odd behavior, even for him, especially considering the friendship between Anakin and Sheev had run silent upon their return. Palpatine did say some friendly remarks to Anakin before they broke off, but Anakin just nodded his head and sauntered back into the vessel, slamming down and taking his seat, letting the ship take off. Palpatine and Windu would go into the pleasantries of political discussions. Because Palpatine at the moment couldn't tell Anakin, he informed Mace that he would appoint Anakin to the High Council to be his personal representative. Palpatine knew what he was doing here. His anticipation was that Mace would either keep it a secret or tell Anakin that it wouldn't happen, only for Anakin to come running to Palpatine and either be told that he was being appointed, or that as Chancellor he could outvote the Jedi Council. Mace was surprised by the guts of Palpatine, and he could see what the Chancellor was trying to do. He was attempting to muscle his way into the Jedi Council. He was using Anakin as a cover, and Mace wouldn't let that fly, so he allowed Sheev to play that game. It wasn't about winning the battle, it was about winning the war, so he would allow Palpatine to believe he had Mace on his back foot. Windu would tell the Chancellor that the Jedi would appoint their own members, and so forth. Palpatine tried a little gaslighting to suggest that Mace didn't believe Anakin was ready, which wasn't the truth. Mace just kept egging Palpatine on. There was a larger game here, and Windu wanted to figure it out. There was no way just a normal politician would have some unforeseen interest in putting a 22-year-old into the ranks of the High Council. Anything was possible, but something about it felt eerie. Mace told Palpatine that the Jedi wouldn't allow Anakin into the High Council. They appointed their own members, and that was the end of that. Palpatine mumbled depressingly to himself, just to put Mace on edge, but it wouldn't work. Windu left Skywalker a message, one that Anakin wouldn't see due to his communications being turned off. Anakin was still an emotional wreck. He tried getting something to eat, which led him to spewing everything out in a disgusting manner. His body reacted so negatively to the situation, and instead of being able to throw his anger outwards, he could only do it inwards. He couldn't kill Palpatine, he couldn't do anything. He had to live with himself. he had to understand that he made the choice to listen. Because all Palpatine did was say some words. Anakin had the choice. Being able to see what the effects of his actions had on those he cared about affected him deeply. It cut right through his heart, and it forced him to feel hopeless and useless. Though one thing slowly started to become evident. He started to build a resentment for Palpatine. The fact that his friend encouraged him to do something he knew was wrong was a sign that perhaps Palpatine wasn't a true friend as he once thought. Skywalker believed that he made a terrible mistake. There was no consolation from Palpatine. Sure, maybe Sheev was recovering from their near-fatal crash, but the fact that everything Anakin was suffering through was because of him made him feel uneasy. One additional thing is that while Anakin didn't like Dooku at all, and had every reason for wanting him dead, he hated the idea of being an executioner. That's what he was, and the thought of being that twisted his stomach into knots. He spent the entire day alone, and when Padme eventually returned, she found the wreck that was her husband. She was very consoling, and then she had to reveal the obvious change that happened to her physically. Despite being at the end of her pregnancy, she hid everything extremely well, and no one noticed. Anakin was surprised that this happened, but for him, it was a little bit comforting. That is until the nightmare started. Anakin would wake up in the middle of the night and have another miniature conversation with Padme, one that was also comforting for him, in a way. The visions of Padme dying in childbirth messed with him mentally, and he knew what he needed to do. So, he went to go and visit Master Yoda. When the morning came around, he and Yoda had a very, very sound talk. It didn't help Anakin, but that's because he wasn't listening in the way he should have been listening. He went there to gain knowledge of special powers, when Yoda was there to help Anakin, as any mentor would and should. The Force is always in motion. What happens isn't decided until it happens. Death is also a natural part of life. Yoda was a little more direct with his warmness due to the recent death of Obi Wan, but his message still stood. Rejoice for those who become one with the Force. Miss them do not, mourn them do not. This was something Yoda was very adamant about. He made it clear to Anakin that the Force surrounds every living being, and when someone passes on, they become a part of that living Force, just as they were when they were alive. He suggested that the individual or individuals he feared losing were always going to be with him, whether they existed in the physical realm or in the afterlife. It may have not been what Anakin wanted to hear, but it was the truth. And in a way, the death of Obi Wan helped Yoda and Anakin connect on a deeper level during this conversation. After speaking with Yoda, Anakin and Master Windu had their own conversation, one that was in a way very similar in tone, but with more jubilee. Mace, without referencing the Chancellor, informed Anakin that the Jedi Council would like to recognize him for his work as a Jedi. The defeat of Count Dooku despite losing Obi-Wan was a deed that only the bravest of Jedi could complete. Against the likes of Dooku, the stakes were even higher. Mace then continued by informing Anakin that, while this elevation would be to the High Council, the collective mind decided that he would receive the rank of Master. However, as per the way of the Jedi, they would not force this onto him if he did not believe he was ready. Mace was adamant that Anakin take time to think this over. The seat he would be taking was Obi-Wan's. Skywalker was surprised by this. He didn't really know what to expect, but he was extremely grateful for the opportunity. The two of them then broke off. Windu had his faith placed in Anakin. The only issue was the fact that he had a hard time trusting him. On top of that, Mace could be a lot more gentle with the situation because it wasn't sprung on him. Palpatine's belief that the Jedi Council wouldn't accept Anakin into their ranks pushed him to assess the situation wrongly. Palpatine had gotten extremely lucky in a multitude of scenarios throughout the Clone Wars, even beforehand, and this was one of those very few instances where his luck ran out. Because Palpatine was yearning to speak to Anakin, Skywalker went across the city. At the same time, the Council came together. Oberyn Cesis just announced that he'd be stepping down from the High Council, which meant that Depa Billaba would fill in momentarily from Kaller. The Jedi decided that they would not make Anakin go on a special mission to spy on the Chancellor. There were a number of reasons for this. Firstly, Mace explained his entire plan, the one that would backdoor Palpatine. Secondly, both Mace and Yoda spoke to Anakin, and according to what Yoda said, there was a growing darkness within Skywalker. It had become more apparent with the loss of Obi Wan. The only reason Mace didn't notice it was because Anakin was excited with his ascension to the Council, which Mace did take responsibility for. The final reason was that the death of Obi Wan would drastically affect Anakin's response to any one of the Council members assigning the task to him. It'd be better if they allowed Palpatine to fall into Mace's trap instead. The Council collectively agreed to this notion and moved on. Instead of Palpatine's office, the Chancellor informed Anakin that he was apologetic for what he had said on the Invisible Hand. As a way to make up for what he said, he wanted Anakin to become his personal representative on the High Council. Anakin informed him that Mace positioned him in Obi-Wan's seat this morning. There'd be no need for that. Out of nowhere, Palpatine told Anakin that he told Mace Windu about it yesterday and was denied. To Anakin, this felt like a lie, even though it was actually the truth. The lack of trust for his mentor coming from the orders Palpatine levied against him on the Invisible Hand made him distrust him. Truthfully, Anakin felt so much shame about both Dooku and Obi-Wan, and he didn't have the courage to tell Windu or Yoda. Now he felt that something was wrong, especially because Palpatine seemed irritated over the entire situation, as if he didn't want Anakin on the council unless it benefited him. Didn't matter. Their little session ended and Anakin returned to the council with rage. He was furious. Not at any of the Jedi, but the situation. It was so frustrating. He didn't know anything, or he felt like he didn't. He got to the chambers once the session had adjourned, and he found Mace Windu and Yoda discussing topics of the war with each other. Anakin's distrust in Palpatine had flipped with his distrust for the Jedi in a matter of 24 hours. When he walked in, both Jedi could tell he was upset, and they asked him what was bothering him. So he, instead of answering, questioned. He asked them why they didn't trust the Chancellor. They wanted to know why he was suspicious, but instead of going back and forth, they expressed to him why. Anakin knew they had issues with Palpatine, after he and Obi-Wan discovered that Dooku built the clone army for them after their little endeavor to Obadiah. It was the Council's decision to keep everything a secret until they won. They then informed Anakin that the dark side of the Force surrounded the Chancellor. He was full of the dark side, and they didn't want him doing something that could take over the galaxy. Anakin could see where they were coming from. They also expressed that his corruption was enough to put the Jedi on edge as it was. Anakin told them that he knew Palpatine was lying because he said he wanted to appoint Anakin to the Council when Mace gave him the rank of Master this morning. Truthfully, it was a double-edged sword. If Anakin learned that Mace was lying, then he could be swayed back to Palpatine. However, if he learned the truth, it could be a bit jarring that the Jedi didn't initially plan on doing it. So, Mace came up with a counter, just to make it a little easier to hear, suggesting that Palpatine said Anakin's heroics during the duel with Dooku made Windu feel inclined to suggest the promotion with the rank of Master. Anakin then realized something. Mace and the Council knew about what happened on the Invisible Hand. He then asked Mace what Palpatine said about it, and when it was revealed to be a complete lie, Anakin told them the truth. He told them that Obi-Wan was thrown across the room and likely killed. He then beat Dooku in a 1 versus 1, and disarmed him, literally. Anakin was going to take him as prisoner, but Palpatine was adamant that Anakin execute the Count, and after a small back and forth, he did. Anakin did obviously exaggerate how long this back and forth went on for. Afterwards, Anakin went back to check on Obi-Wan, and Palpatine dragged him away. Another exaggeration, but it was, all in essence, the truth. All of which being the truth from Anakin's perspective of the situation. The Jedi were equally as outraged, though none of them was as outraged as Anakin was. He was in the wrong for both actions, but what else was he supposed to do? They knew there was a close bond between Anakin and Palpatine, and the truth is, it seemed like Palpatine took advantage of said bond. The two Jedi told Anakin that they wanted him to be wary of his interactions with the Chancellor. He agreed that he would be. Anakin would have the perfect opportunity in the following hours to be wary. The distractions were keeping Skywalker away from going into the restricted section, which did really peeve him. This was all a part of Palpatine's plan. Knowing now that the Jedi were keeping up with him, he needed Anakin to be pulled back down into the darkness. Despite how active Anakin had been, running from place to place, being in meetings with the Council and the Chancellor, he was neglecting so many of his emotions. All of his time away from his inner thoughts allowed things to build up within him. Because as it turns out, acting like something isn't there, especially inner pain, allows it to bubble up over time. One isn't just getting rid of the problem, they're just neglecting it until it becomes an unstable one. So Anakin got to spend the night at the Opera House, learning about Sith legends and so forth. Everything felt terribly wrong, and Anakin again was looking for answers. After a night at the opera, he returned home. Instead of going to bed, he sat in the living room. He was being eaten away by his thoughts. His feelings and emotions were out of balance, and he had a plan, but he didn't know if he could do it. He accidentally fell asleep scheming on the couch, and was awoken in the middle of the night by another night terror. His voice echoed out throughout the apartment, which brought Padme out to a lit-up living room. Anakin was really drowsy, but he and she talked for a short moment. She knew he was under a lot of pressure, and she was doing as much as she could to help, but they were all under a lot of pressure. Anakin just told her that he knew what he needed to do, but he didn't know if he had the strength to do it. Padme told him that he didn't. He always had the strength to persevere. She didn't know what he was talking about when he said this. He appreciated her and made his move once he finally actually woke up. Coruscant was gorgeous at night. The city truly never slept, and he loved it. He hopped into his Jedi starfighter and quietly cruised across the city. His vessel was silent on the interior. All that he could hear were his thoughts passing by like buildings in the dark. He landed a block away from where he wanted to be. He knew that this would be a very difficult mission to pull off. His black robes covered his head as he exited. He pulled a cycler rifle from a trunk on the street, using it as bait. His metallic hand would cover up any trace of DNA. Skywalker continued around and snuck into the Chancellor's mansion. Royal guards were on duty, which meant that Palpatine was home. He had just returned from the works, having implemented the nightmares in the Skywalker's mind. He was off to sleep. The next day held triumph for him. Either Anakin would go to Utapau, or he would stay and feel the burden of the Jedi Council. Palpatine knew he could recover from his hiccup on the invisible hand. The death of Kenobi made him a martyr instead of a flawed Jedi Master who failed his student. No matter, he could fix it. Anakin snuck into the mansion, having been inside a number of times. He knew the layout pretty well and he searched for Palpatine's room. When he found it, he snuck in. Palpatine was sleeping, white noise playing in the background. It was the easiest kill, but was it right? What if Palpatine wasn't the Sith Lord? What if he was just a regular dude? Anakin couldn't take a chance on that, not over Obi Wan's life. The action of making Anakin leave Obi Wan behind was jealousy, and it was vile. Leaving Obi Wan behind was something only someone who didn't feel like they had an in would do, correct? Anakin stood watching Palpatine from the corner of the room, his hand on his lightsaber. He could feel the rush. But just like Darth Plagueis the Wise, Sidious wouldn't be wise enough to surrender. The irony of telling the tragedy of his master is that he would die in a similar way, but Anakin would blast a rifle a couple of times, feel for a pulse, which he should have done on the invisible hand, and then prepare to leave. Palpatine was dead, but his guards weren't. Anakin turned around with a rifle and blasted through the royal guards who entered, and then like a thief in the night, he vanished out the window. The guards who didn't die believed that this was the work of a bounty hunter. Skywalker took the Jedi ship out of the alleyway and used it to go down some back ways until he got to Padme's residence. After all, it wasn't the first time he needed to be quiet about sneaking away. In the morning, he'd be woken up by Windu, who called his communication device. Mace told Skywalker he was needed at the temple immediately. Anakin left as quickly as he could, believing he was in trouble. He did give his love to Padme before he left, but he didn't say a word about what happened the night before. Padme didn't even know he left the previous night, so that was good. When Anakin arrived at the temple, Mace brought Anakin to the council chambers in a rush. Anakin started to panic, but Mace was very quiet. Skywalker believed that he was going to be yelled at where no one could hear. But when they got into the council chambers, he didn't know how to understand what was happening. The doors to the council chambers opened and Anakin looked into the eyes of Obi Wan Kenobi. He was breathing. His outfit was a little dirty, but without missing a beat, Anakin lunged across the room and embraced his master, asking him if he was alright and what happened. Obi Wan reciprocated the hug and then they broke off. He asked Anakin if he was alright, to which he was, especially now. Yoda, Mace, and Anakin looked at Obi Wan as Skywalker questioned what happened or how. It was simple. He woke up when the ship received a couple of volleys. Obi Wan was very confused, but upon seeing Dooku's dead body, he figured that Skywalker won. But worried that Grievous had captured him, so he made a run for the elevators. That's when the ship split into pieces. Kenobi was thrown into a wall, and then the G-force cemented him into said wall. Obi-Wan would have died had he not trapped himself inside the elevator shaft. It had airlocks in it, so if it opened up, he'd be safe. After a total freefall, Obi-Wan was crushed under the weight of thousands of pounds of metal. He wasn't actually, but he was just kinda trapped under it. He used his lightsaber to cut open a bigger hole, but he couldn't see the light. So, for the last 2 days, he was trying to get free, and then decided to make a communication frequency because his was crushed. He was able to get help in the early morning. Also, Palpatine died last night, so that was something. Anakin acted surprised, and the Jedi thought it was weird, but chalked up his shabby acting job to him being caught up in his emotions over Obi-Wan returning from the dead. It was a crazy turn of events. The next couple minutes would unveil new information. Quinlan was returning to lead the investigation. General Grievous was on Utapau, and Agon Kolar was going to fight him, as well as Obi-Wan learning about Anakin's rise to the council chambers. Obi-Wan was certainly caught off guard, but he was pleased with how everything was turning out. To add to the semi-good news, the Jedi investigators discovered Sith relics and lightsabers inside of Palpatine's mansion, identifying him as either a Sith loyalist or a Sith Lord. Though with the tension starting to wrap up and Color engaging Grievous on Utapau, the war was pretty much over. However, Anakin's stress wasn't. He was still worried about Padme. Despite how happy he was that Obi-Wan returned, he needed to know how to save her life. His emotions were finally functioning again, and he felt eager to get a move on learning what he needed to learn. But the truth is, the secret to Padme's life being saved wasn't found in the archives, rather the actions made by Skywalker. One often meets their destiny on the road they take to avoid it. Because Anakin was so mentally worn and distracted from becoming the executioner, and the reason for Obi-Wan's apparent death, he never had a chance to focus on his biggest fear. He was wrapped up in the conspiracy with Palpatine and the Jedi promoting him to the Council as a master, that he never actually had a moment to really breathe. He finally breathed again when Luke and Leia were born. Anakin and Padme would be incredibly happy, and both of them would disappear from Coruscant for 2 weeks. Anakin said there were assassination threats on Padme's life, and they needed to go. Those threats were genuinely valid, because despite what Quinlan saw in his psychometric vision, the Council took his information and twisted it, saying it was a bounty hunter who killed Palpatine. Anakin killed the Sith Lord. They could give him some leeway here. They definitely debated the topic while he was on Naboo for a couple of weeks, but with Grievous killed by Swordmaster Agan Kolar, there was no reason to punish Anakin. He killed Dooku and Sidious. The Sith were gone, and while he was gone, his former student brought Maul back to the Jedi Temple in a Mandalorian sarcophagus. The Sith were literally destroyed. Anakin brought balance to the Force. The light prevailed, and the Jedi would be able to rise from the ashes of war. During their little vacation, Anakin and Padme would decide on their future, one in which Anakin would tell the Jedi of his marriage, wishing that the twins would be trained by the Jedi, but trained the way he was. This was a complete change to the status quo, but the newer minds of the Council believed that if the Order was to survive and prevail, it must be ready to adapt to change, something it hadn't done in the last 100 years. It was time the Jedi ushered in this new era. As Ahsoka became a knight, she would also keep her stay in the Order. As the years went by, the Jedi expanded, and Luke would be trained by Ahsoka, him being her second student. Leia, on the other hand, would be trained by Obi Wan, his third student. Anakin was permitted to train them, but he decided that he'd rather view both of their training from a distance, instead of picking just one of them to train, or even both of them. Sure, he could train both of them, but why do that, when those closest to him could be a part of the family he always dreamed of? With those same years passing by, Mace and Anakin would become almost brother-like, Windu becoming Grand Master when Yoda stepped down, and Skywalker becoming Master of the Order. The war may have taken millions of lives, but the resolve from the changing leadership in the galaxy brought a greater future that only could have been molded by those who led. And that, my friends, is our story. Again, special thanks to our patrons: Galvin Gaming, Tristan Mandalore, Sir William 1767, Darth Revan, Granddaddy Bane, Laliand, Sky Guy, Penguin, Cullen Rooney, Shark Midori, RJ38, Nick, Michael Erlanger, The Last Jedi, Apollo, Weewa 670, Annika Stank Runner, CT7567, Toaster Oven, Oz of Oz, Darth Nox, The Eternal Padawan, Joshua Tem, Johnny DeGuin, Sith Skeleton, Jedi Sloth, Mr. Yeet Gamer, Lord Cali, Gunley 66, Mammoth Studios, Anakin 003, Lord Draken, 46 Like Star Wars, Airbus, Rex Wolf, Man 3 First Names, Dark Saint 46, Baron Joshua, and Deadwing 4 supporting the channel. Smash that like button. Other things, go check the description. Yeah, that's pretty cool. Anyways, let's talk about this story. So the concept of leaving Obi-Wan behind was something that I thought would be really challenging, and it was, because you have to meld the conflict of him losing Obi-Wan with the fear of him losing Padme. And I think the only way he wouldn't go to the dark side is because Palpatine got Obi-Wan killed. I think something that's kind of neglected is how Anakin may have felt killing Dooku. Not being that he cared for Dooku in any way, shape, or form, but just the fact that he knew it was morally wrong when it happened. And I thought that'd be really cool to play off of in this story, because I don't feel like it's ever been mentioned or really ever talked about. And so I feel like the combination of Dooku's death at Anakin's hands and Obi-Wan's death at Anakin's hands would be the catalyst for him becoming more trusting of the Jedi. So anyways, I hope you all enjoyed. I love you all, spread the love, and always remember, my friends, may the Force be with you.